We've been told now for several months in the media that we should not cast aspersions on the Black Lives Matter movement when 95% of the protests are peaceful. It's only about 5% that turn into chaos, that have these activists trying to storm hospitals or sabotaging people's meals at restaurants and demanding people raise their fists. Only about 5%. We can't label the entirety of the movement as hostile, violent, or bad, given the small number. Why then are we supposed to do that with police officer-involved shootings? Over the weekend, an activist, now I'm being told you can't call this person an activist because we don't know who they are, which is a willful ignorance of what's going on in the country. An activist tried to kill 2 police officers in Los Angeles. The video, if you haven't seen the video, this person walks up to a police vehicle and opens fire on 2 sheriff's deputies in Los Angeles, a female mom and a male deputy, her partner. They are in critical condition. They had to go through surgery. The activist runs away, and Black Lives Matter protesters know exactly which hospital these 2 are taken to and show up to try to storm the hospital and stop their lives from being saved, and chanting that the police officers got what they deserved. I'd like to make a point of common sense here. We've been told now for several months in the media that we should not cast aspersions on the Black Lives Matter movement when 95% of the protests are peaceful. It's only about 5% that turn into chaos, that have these activists trying to storm hospitals or sabotaging people's meals at restaurants and demanding people raise their fists. Only about 5%. We can't label the entirety of the movement as hostile, violent, or bad, given the small number. Why then are we supposed to do that with police officer-involved shootings? Because the overwhelming number of those are warranted. Why are we to defund whole police departments because of a few bad actors, but we're not allowed to do the same with the Black Lives Matter movement? Why the double standard? It seems if we're told not to judge an entire movement by a few bad apples in the Black Lives Matter movement, then we should not judge an entire police force in the United States by a few bad apples in the police force. And yet that's what we're told to do. And we're told to do it because one side has privilege and one side doesn't. Well, I've seen the Black Lives Matter protesters, and they're overwhelmingly young white kids. And I'm told that young white men have the most privilege in this country. And I've seen a lot of the police officers who are getting yelled at, and they happen to be black men who have less privilege than the white people marching in the Black Lives Matter protests, according to the critical theorists out there. So I'm very confused as to how this can align so that we're to be sympathetic to the white protesters who are harassing diners and showing up at people's houses and demanding that people throw their fists in the air in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, when 1, they're not even black, and 2, that's a rather authoritarian communist thing to do. But when we see these black police officers out there who are being spit upon and called race traitors, we're not supposed to have sympathy with them. We're supposed to define all of them by the few bad actors, the Derek Chauvins and the like, who knelt on George Floyd's neck. And then I'll tell you the other thing that bugs me about all of this is that how we're supposed to condemn all police-related shootings and not look at the individual circumstances. We're not allowed to look at the individual circumstances. So I can look at the individual circumstances of Black Lives Matter and say, yeah, overwhelmingly it's peaceful. But the movement itself as a trend is increasingly getting more hostile and more violent. Police, on the other hand, in this country are not getting more violent. If anything, they are responding to the outrage and trying to correct things. And we also do see, however, in a bunch of shootings, some of them particularly, I have a hard time getting worked up about. For example, Rayshard Brooks in Atlanta, that caused violence in Atlanta after he was shot and killed. The police absolutely did their jobs till Rayshard Brooks turned violent in a split second, grabbed one of their tasers, tried to fire it at a police officer, and he fired and killed Rayshard Brooks. Or take Jacob Blake. Based on what has been reported thus far about that individual, he was tased by police. It did not deter him. He tried to reach into his car. We now know there was a knife in his car, whether he was trying to reach for it or not. Did not respond to the police, and the police officer opened fire on him. I have a real hard time condemning the police for that. Jacob Blake is lucky to be alive. He was shot 7 times, and you have people out there who are not involved in police, do not seem to know how guns work, and they seem to demand that, maybe just shoot him in the leg. I have a real hard time using the police body camera footage of various incidents to second guess police officers who are making split-second decisions in scenes that play out over 10, 15 seconds. And activists want to armchair quarterback who weren't there, don't understand the situation, and yet want to burn down America because of what they perceive or predefine before the facts come out what actually happened. We've got a problem with racism in the country, and per capita, the police do tend to behave differently around black suspects than white suspects. Per capita, there are more police by number shootings of white people in this country, but per capita, there are a fewer number of black people in this country than white people. Per capita, there are more black shootings by police officers in this country. And I'm not willing to label them all bad because a lot of those involve gangs and other things that skew the numbers, and we should judge them individually. We can look at what happened with George Floyd and an officer's knee on his neck for 8 minutes, 46 seconds and say that's unacceptable, particularly when the other officers are telling the officer he can cut it out now. But I got a real hard time using that to define every single action by police if we're to judge people individually. Now, if we're to judge people by a group, then we need to judge the Black Lives Matter people by their group as well. And so we need to judge them by the activists who tried to kill 2 police officers. We need to judge them by the activists who tried to block the hospital and then storm the hospital and drag out the bodies so they couldn't be saved. We need to define them by the protesters who were showing up at restaurants and people's houses to harass people. Which is it? Do we judge each one individually, or do we judge them by a group? Because I got to tell you, if we're judging by a group, I'm on the side of the police and everybody else is too.
I really